spoilers? Oh, lots and lots of spoilers.
Good old Freda. A title usually reserved for another character in this pantheon. Perhaps one of the most enigmatic characters in the Peanuts ensemble, she is best remembered for her o'erweening pride in her naturally curly hair. But few remember that she was also obsessed with getting Snoopy to catch and kill rabbits. What drove this curly-haired diva to this hatred for the humble lapine? This movie attempts to unmask the driving fury behind the idea that would...
Max.
What?
What the hell did you watch?
The good old Freda. You don't like good old Charlie Brown? But...
No, this has nothing to do with Peanuts. This is a movie about the secretary to the Beatles.
Well, the Beatles, sure, the Fab Four.
You know the series
Charlie
doing?
Charlie Brown, Snoopy, Lucy, and Linus. And
John, Paul, George, and Ringo.
Right.
Beatles!
Yes.
Peanuts! Certainly no Peanuts for you.
Peanuts, same thing. Except the Peanuts stayed together a lot longer.
Ooh!
And Yoko didn't break them up.
Ooh!
Yes, this is our ladies and gentlemen, the Beatles series. So this, in fact, would make more sense that we're actually talking about good old Freda, which is a 2013 indie documentary that treads some very familiar ground, the story of, the Beatles, in a surprising and unfamiliar way through the eyes of Freda Kelly, who served as the head of the Beatles fan club for the entirety of the band's existence. Another Liverpudlian, although originally Irish.
Ooh.
Yeah. Is this a new and fresh take on an oft-told tale? A tale as old as time, one might say.
No, one might not.
All right, one won't then. Or is it just the same old song, but with a different beat since you've been gone? Okay, that's the Four Tops, I know, but there are four of them too.
Yes, and their names were John, Paul, George, and Ringo.
Exactly. I am your host, that real nowhere man, Max Levine, and over yonder is your other host, whose yellow submarine is about to be towed, I think.
Oh, crap.
Mike Luce, jeez.
I gotta go.
Yeah. Now, before we launch into trivia, we have our poll question.
Poll question.
Last week, we asked you, what subject matter do you think is most lacking in movie theaters? What area has Hollywood not explored enough? And boy, howdy, you had some opinions on this.
Boy, howdy.
Oh, yes, indeed. From boy, howdy, we got Noah. From Geneva Brunetti, said, I'm thinking on this one. It's hard because there used to be an easy answer, which was the opposite of my joke. She made a joke about superhero movies. Originals. I feel like there's a resurgence in what used to be called B films. Look at the most recent Best Picture winner, Coda, for example. 10 million is still lots of money in real people terms, but is a relatively lower budget film, although even that was based on something else. So that's interesting. I really wouldn't have thought of a B film as just one with a lower budget. Over the last handful of years or so my answer a few years ago would have been different than today. I'll get back to you. And she did.
Oh, good.
Thank you for getting back to us, Geneva.
So far we have a lot of not answer.
Yeah. All right. Here's a real answer of things I think are lacking or we could see more of. Not that they aren't there in a few examples, but what I'd like to see, crew flicks. You get lots of pieces of where people are actors or writers, but not crew. I want to see a gritty grip movie. Okay. International musicals. Eastern Europeans that aren't poor or evil. There are some?
Max!
Okay. Wow. I only know it from the movies. I just assumed they were all poor or evil.
You just lost our entire Eastern European audience.
Which is who?
They're very nice people.
Fat people not battling with their weight, just battling with regular stuff. Oh boy, I think you're reaching for the sky there, but sure. People taking care of their animals who don't end up dying. Okay.
Yellow.
More steady cabs. Yes, please. Black and white. Though this is slowly making a comeback with a few recent pieces.
See our entire episode on Macbeth.
Female auteurs other than Sofia Coppola. Love her, but it's way overdue for a new generation. I don't know, we're getting like Greta Gerwig and the director of Code, and Jane Campion. But
Sure.
actually, Jane Campion is older than Sofia Coppola. So anyway,
I think everyone is.
So thank you, Geneva.
Yeah.
That's some really, really good list.
Yep.
From Dave.
Dave.
I'm into historical dramas right now. Anything set in a particular period is fun for me. The 50s, 60s, and 70s are all ripe for the plucking. I've also been enjoying The Serpent on Netflix because it is so 1970s and so Bangkok. All right, I would recognize one of those two things.
I kind of got back to Dave on this one. It's like, I honestly think there's been a lot of films about the 50s, 60s, and 70s.
Quite a few, I would think.
But maybe he's talking about films about the 50s, 60s, and 70s that don't take place in the United States. That
or that don't all take place in Los Angeles.
Right. Yeah. Yes. I mean, it's handy. It's right there, but...
Chrissy Becker writes, movies about marginalized people that are about joy and success, not trauma.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a dearth.
Yeah.
It really is. Kelly Cooper writes, Chrissy Becker, I came here to say that. Also, more female-led heist movies or otherwise action-y flicks where women are the main characters in charge and having fun. Those do tend to be more the exception than the rule.
They do, but I also want them where they don't in any way go, and they're women!
Yeah.
Just let the, like, what was it, the Tom Cruise film, Live and Die Again, that stupid thing, future repeating?
Oh,
and it had
lather, rinse, repeat. Yeah, it had Emily Blunt in it.
And they never once do the, and she's a woman, or in any way sexualize her. Speaking just for me, admittedly, that's what I want. She's just a character. It's not also and she's overcome the fact that she's a woman. There's nothing to overcome except your prejudice. So that's what I want to see. Is this like what she's talking about, the heist films, but not like it's Ghostbusters, but with women? Don't do that. Just make it that's what the characters are. Sorry, rant.
Don't make an issue of it. Yeah. Matthew Reisman says, I'd love to see more 2D animation.
Yeah.
More of a stylistic choice than a subject matter, though.
Yes.
For subject matter, I want more fantasy and whimsy that doesn't have to be self-aware, tongue-in-cheek, or a dark, almost horror interpretation.
Wow. Good luck.
I also, I don't know, Matt. That may be reaching for the moon there. I'm also pretty much always up for more heist movies.
Yeah.
I don't think they're going away.
I do love me some heist movies. Yeah. When Ocean's 11 got remade, there was a little, like, pocket of them. A lot of which were very good and forgotten. I really liked Heist. And what was the one with...
Italian Job?
The Italian Job was okay. And then there was another one I really liked with Gene Hackman, and I can never remember the name of it. But... yeah, and a lot of people didn't see it, but it was actually a really good heist film. I'm all for that. And also 2D animation. There's things you can do much better in 2D that you can't do in 3D.
Yeah.
Spider-Verse is a pretty damned good example, I'd like to say.
It really is.
So.
Valerie, I'm in no way related to Mike Coons, writes, middle-aged people as actual people. Are they? Are we?
Look in the mirror.
Well, I know I'm not. It seems, I'm fictional. It seems like they get relegated to being parents or grandparents or the protagonist stockbroker. There are a couple of movies about retirees, but there aren't a lot of films about oldish folks. And I agree with Geneva. Well, that covers a lot of ground. And I agree with Geneva. Sure.
Yeah. But that's because everyone thinks the audience is always young people. They forget that middle-aged people have more money, generally. Just saying.
Yeah. We do podcasts about movies, too.
Yeah.
And from the Great White North, Vince the Snowman writes,
Snowy!
Subjects I think we could see more of would be those that are made by and about Native populations.
Yeah.
There are a few films about and by Native American lives, and really none I can think of that get much attention. The same could be said of stories from many poorer nations who have a reality that might seem almost extraterrestrial compared to what Hollywood is putting out. I can't help but think all film would be lifted up by some never-seen perspectives.
Yeah.
That's a very good point.
Very good point. And remember, going back to our series on whitewashing, that episode where we had Professor Dr. Rebecca Pelkey, and we got to talk about The Lone Ranger, which is a brilliant depiction of
Lord.
Native American life. Yeah. There's basically no representation there at all coming from the community. So yeah, I totally agree with that. I think of the hundreds of films, the hundreds of stories from all of those, it doesn't matter what, Aboriginal films, whatever, that we have never even touched. There's like a giant universe of stories from any of these communities, and we've seen basically nothing. So
yeah,
good choice. Max, what about you? Do you have any areas you think Hollywood is not representing enough?
Areas.
They represent that plenty.
I actually go along with the one about showing more middle-aged people actually, doing stuff as opposed to looking back on their lives in despair as if they're over.
Yeah, because they're not.
But not yet. What about you?
Definitely the marginalized people, or the people that are generally basically ignored in the films. More film with strong women characters that aren't making a point of it. They just happen to be who they are, and we're watching their story. And quite honestly, more films with wonder ponies, because we don't have nearly enough movies.
I think one is too many. And there is another one I'd like to just, I don't know really if it's subject matter, but it's kind of a trope. And I'm not trying to virtue signal here or anything. I'd like to see more movies with gay main characters where the fact that they're gay is not the central plot item.
Oh man, would I like to see that? And no trauma. Yeah. Oh, the drama. Oh, oh.
Or there can be drama, but it doesn't have to be about their sexuality.
Yeah, man. No. I should have said that one, but there was a couple of movies previews that I was watching with my partner the other day, and they were still about that. The whole, I come out, and what if blah, blah, blah. And he just rolled his eyes and just said the drama and clicked the button, and we moved on to something else. Because even we're sick of it.
I'm with Patton Oswalt. When he was talking about how he was going to be cast in a movie as the gay best friend.
Friend!
He wanted to play him like he was a complete idiot. It's like, because, in the movie, he says, in the movies, the gay best friend is always like, drops in these magical wonder pieces of wisdom and is the sassy friend. He said, I know gay people. Some of them are smart. Some of them are average. Some of them are stupid. I want to see one about a stupid gay character.
Yeah. Bad life choices.
Well, thank you. All those were all terrific answers. We really appreciate them. We really appreciate you guys making the effort. My God, you people are eloquent. Yes. Stop it.
It really upsets Max no end.
It does, man. That means we have to look even more eloquent. And quite honestly, you ain't making that easy.
What, me?
No, you're making it very easy. There. Bumpy is really making it easy. But we have a brand new poll question.
We do? We've never done that before.
Yep. This one is vaguely related to the last one, but only vaguely.
That's fine.
What action movie cliche punches the biggest hole in your suspension of disbelief? What is it? People walking away from an explosion and not being knocked over? Somebody diving unharmed through a plate glass window? The way people shrug off bullet wounds? What is it that you think Hollywood should just stop doing there?
I know what Max's is, but I won't tell you till next week.
Yep. And at the end, we will reveal the great secret of how to get your answer to us. Spoiler alert, it's the same secret we've told you every week for 186 episodes. Or at this point, 188.
Yeah.
But now, trivia.
Ooh. The show.
There is not exactly a plethora of.
Did you make some up like I do?
I did.
Oh, good.
Few people know this, but Freda Kelly was actually John Wilkes Booth.
Ooh.
Yes, through his time travel accident and a sex change operation. No.
I thought they killed him.
That's what they want you to think.
Oh. It was on TV. It was that whole prison transfer thing, right? That's where Jack Ruby came out and shot John Wilkes Booth.
Yeah, I think that's right. Yeah, but actually Jack Ruby was one of the lizard people.
Yeah, the owner of the local titty bar, apparently. Anyway, what
trivia that he could bring a handgun in there.
Sure, he's fine.
Yes.
What trivia do you have?
Well, this movie was funded entirely on Kickstarter for about $60,000.
Wow.
Yeah. Whole thing, and it made about $139,000.
Well,
technically a success. Made its money back.
Yeah.
The title of the film, Good Old Frida, comes from the 1963 Beatles Christmas record, which was the first of a series of special records created every year by the group for its fan club members. On this particular one in 1963, George Harrison actually goes out of his way to specifically thank Freda Kelly for her work, and all the other three Beatles all yell out, "Good old Freda!" Freda Kelly is divorced now. She is still alive. Her son tragically died very young. I could not find out the cause. And her daughter claimed to have known only about 5% of what Freda talks about in this movie. We'll get to that.
Yeah.
This is the first independent film to have successfully licensed original Beatles recordings, because that ain't cheap.
I bet it isn't.
And according to Ryan White, it's well known, he was the director, it's well known the Beatles' music is not in many films, so we knew that was going to be our largest hurdle from the very beginning. I've never made a Beatles film before, but when you start talking to people who have, you hear about how it's a nightmare to deal with licenses and it's never going to happen. So it's a total testament to Freda that we got that far, and that we have 4 Beatles songs in our film, which I think is almost unheard of. It's very clear when you start talking to Apple, the umbrella organization for the Beatles, that there's still a lot of respect for her in that building. So I think I'm a very lucky filmmaker.
Oh, cool.
Very cool.
Neat.
Yeah. According to the DVD, there's some special features on the DVD. The director, Ryan White, also says Freda had just graduated from school and was working her first job as a secretary, a typist, at a food cannery. And 2 of the guys from upstairs, 2 of the accountants, took her to the Cavern for a lunchtime session. She'd never seen the Beatles or heard the Beatles, heard of them, and she fell in love right away, started going every single day. She was 17.
Yeah.
That is largely it. There is not much else known about. We'll get more about Freda herself as we talk about the movie. The plot, as much as a documentary can be expected to have a plot, there have been many documentaries about the Beatles, but this one takes a fresh and largely unknown perspective, that of one Freda Kelly, who at the age of 17 became the head of the Beatles Fan Club and stayed in that job, working for the late lamented Brian Epstein for the entire time the Beatles were together, for 11 years, and even for a few years after that. She never wrote a book or even spoke much of her time with the Beatles, even to her family, until at the age of 68 she was asked to be the subject of this documentary, and she decided to do it for her grandson, just so that at some point he could know what an exciting life his old grandma had in the 60s. Freda was with the Beatles at the beginning, through their unrivaled climb to fame, and through the eventual dissolution of the group. Through her eyes, we get a very human, very grounded insight into one of the most iconic bands in history.
The Lowdown.
So, Max, I wonder, have you seen this film before?
Yes, I have.
Oh.
As have you.
Huh?
No.
Yep,
you and I both saw this in 2013 when it came out at the Brattle Theater.
Are you? No.
Yes.
Did we?
Yes, you did. Yes, you did.
Oh,
we did. We both saw it. And
you mention it. I did kind of feel part of the way through the film, I'm like, this feels vaguely familiar. And then spoiler, when Ringo shows up, I'm like, I'm sure I saw this. But now that you mentioned...
You were very drunk at the time, so...
Yeah, well, actually, no, it wasn't that one. We did go see a film with the Brattle, which involved beer.
Yeah.
It was some dreadful Canadian film. It was one of their Trash Tuesdays. So you didn't remember it really that much?
I remembered a fair amount, but once I remembered that, it existed,
yeah,
a lot of it came back.
Yeah. I will say one of the things I found both most interesting and most confusing is because she was really dealing with the fans. That was she directly dealt with the Beatles too. They would come in and they would sign things for her and stuff. But she was dealing directly with the fans. So there was a lot of footage I hadn't seen before of people talking to the fans.
Yeah.
And there's one point early in the film where they're just talking to these 2 girls and they're basically asking what they want. And they're just like, we just want to touch them. We wouldn't hurt them. It was just like, and you're just watching these crazed people.
Oh, and that one line that just really did you catch this? It freaked me out. One of them saying, "I mean, we grew up on the Beatles. They belong to us."
Yeah.
It's like, no, they don't. Stop that.
It's in some ways it's a really interesting, and I actually didn't even think about this till just now. It's a really interesting comparison of fame and how people deal with it. Because on the one hand, you have these fans, and to this day, I have no idea what caused this. Because we start off with her going to the Cavern Club, which quite honestly is a dive. It's a basement in an industrial area of London that somebody has hosed out. Liverpool, I'm sorry, yep. That somebody has hosed out and put a stage in, because it's all this stone and brickwork that's obviously just there to hold up this, warehouse. And they've made a club out of it. And this is like, they've been in Germany. So they've been in Germany for a year, or however long they were in Germany, and they've come back.
Yeah.
But it's not like they're a thing yet.
Nobody knows them. I mean,
and Pete Best is still in the band.
Pete Best is still the drummer. I didn't remember he's a good-looking fellow.
Yeah, he's a nice.
He was a good-looking kid, but I do love the way she describes the way it smells.
Yeah,
because it's across from the fruit market, and it smells like disinfectant, old fruit, and sweat.
Yeah, it could have been. I was waiting for her to say urine, but
she's very classy.
She is, and we'll get to her. I want to save her for a little bit later. But so we see some footage. There actually is some footage of them at the Cavern Club, which I had seen before. There's no sound, but that's okay.
Yeah.
But you're talking to people, and you see people talking about them from then. And it isn't just, oh, yeah, there's this band I really like. You've probably never heard of them, called the Beatles. It's like, oh, my God, did you see the... Ah!
Yeah.
I mean...
Yeah, they're free. Some of these fans are freaking out from day one.
Yeah.
She wasn't. Freda was like, well, I like them. I fancy them. I think they're very good, but...
Oh, she also has a different favorite because of how she deals with it. It's like, oh, this week Paul came in and he was really nice and asked about my mom. So that week it's like... Yeah, I think I fancy Paul. Yep. And then next week, John will come in and John will sit down and do some extra stuff for her and just, maybe I fancy John. And so she was like...
I like how she keeps forgetting to call Ringo. She keeps calling him Richie because, his name is Richard Starkey.
Right. And I guess that's how she was introduced to him. I don't know.
Yep.
Because she was obviously there, if not leader of secretary of this fan club before Ringo showed up. She was following the band because she said after the first time she went, she would go there during her lunch hours and come back with the smell of the Cavern Club on her, and her coworkers knew it, and she was like, I don't care. And it was literally just, she was a hanger-on that got noticed, happened to be a secretary, and they needed somebody for the job, and it was like, hey, you want to be a secretary for the fan club of the Beatles? Okay.
It was a friend of hers was the secretary, and she said got a boyfriend.
Yeah.
And didn't want to do it anymore. And they said, you want to do it? And she started and just never stopped.
You think that person's been kicking themselves ever since?
I wonder if it's like whoever it was, that record producer who turned down both the Beatles and the Rolling Stones.
Oh. Ooh.
Oh, yeah.
But to this day, no one has been able to explain to me, and this movie doesn't attempt to, and that's fine, but no one has been able to explain to me just what the hell it was that caused people to react that way.
I don't know if anybody knows. There was an ineffable quality they had.
But it also has to be something to do with the time. The times have to have been like there was just a dearth of. Except there wasn't. There was Elvis. Admittedly, he was more popular in America than he ever was in Europe. There was, oh God, I can't think of his name. Begins with a C. Anyway, there was lots of other people.
Yeah, there was Little Richard. There was.
Well, that's when they get their big break. They get to open for Little Catalina Caper Richard.
Yep, on the Little Richard show.
Who's playing at a big, the big hall of Liverpool.
Yep. And the Empire.
The Empire. And
Save the Empire.
Damn the man.
Yep.
That was actually one of the things I did like about this is they show footage or photographs of these places, and then they take her to some of them. And so she gets to sit there and reminisce about, oh, I remember when they came out, or they were on this balcony, or they actually go to, I think it's Ringo's family's home. And she's like, oh, yeah, I was over here all the time. And his mother kind of like adopted me. She was sort of like the mother figure.
That was so sweet. Apparently his mother, like she said, yes, I came in just to bring him, she was bringing him his mail or some such, or bringing some forms for him to sign. And her mom's like, no, that was it, because they were having their parents, according to her, their parents would answer their fan mail for the most part, because they were getting 20 or 30 letters. They weren't getting a lot. And Ringo's mom couldn't figure out how to do it.
Right.
So she came over to teach her.
At that point, they were actually, the rest of the Beatles were getting up to 200.
Oh, yeah. And
then Ringo was like, will you take care of mine? It's like, oh, I feel so bad asking you. And it's 9 letters. Yep. 9.
And she said, I was a kid. I didn't think. I just looked at him and said, you've only got 9.
Poor Ringo.
Poor old Ringo.
And then she talks about having tea. She would come by for tea with Ringo's mom. And it's like, oh, it's so sweet. Tea with Ringo's mom.
That's one of the things she discusses, is she was close to most of the family. I mean, the Harrisons liked her, and the McCartneys. The only one who she didn't get close to is the one nobody got close to.
That was John Lennon's aunt.
Auntie Miriam.
Yeah.
John Lennon's auntie, Mimi, who raised him, and there's whole books written about her.
Yeah, I don't know that background. And I know that the man we saw in there was Paul's stepfather.
Yeah.
So it was John Lennon's aunt. But I got to say, Ringo and George don't look anything like their parents at all.
No resemblance at all.
And there's no resemblance between John and his aunt, which, there could have been.
Yeah.
And Paul's stepfather doesn't make any sense. I did like the fact that we had, or maybe it was his dad, and it was because his stepmother was in the movie.
Yeah.
Which I thought was interesting. She looked great. I was like, how are you still alive? Because the rest of them had all passed away. But, and some of the other people they talked to, obviously just wasn't many people left around.
Yeah.
There's 2 guys from a band I'd never heard of.
A couple of other musicians who were on the same circuit in Liverpool, so they knew the Beatles coming up, because everybody knew everybody, because Liverpool, it's a city, but it's not a huge city, and the music scene was not enormous.
Yeah. And, I was talking earlier about, because we're going to probably lead into this, I don't see how we can't. I was talking earlier about how different people deal with fame differently. In general, I've noticed, just in general, the Brits tend to deal with it a lot better than the Americans do. And I say that especially when it comes to child actors. I look at the entire crew of the Harry Potter films. One of them turned out to be he got into some trouble. But that was it. Like all the main characters, those actors, I don't have any drug stories about them. I don't have any stories about them beating people up or spending all their money on an ice cream truck. Rupert Grint.
He didn't spend all his money. He didn't spend a significant fraction of his money.
No.
He just happened to buy an ice cream truck.
He basically just said, I wanted something that would make me and people happy, so I bought an ice cream truck. I think that's really charming.
I think that's cute.
But
But
look at Freda. Basically, Freda was like, I love these guys, and I have loyalty to these guys. And that was a very big theme of who she was and who she still is. And they ask her, one of the earliest questions they ask her is they talk about how she was there all the time. And they say, well, did you go out with any of them? And she says, no. And they sort of the camera pauses, you can tell the cameraman or the director's going, really?
And then she says, I don't want anyone's hair to fall out or to curl. Yeah. So pass.
Right.
She won't answer.
No. And you get the feeling that she didn't write it down anywhere, that nobody knows but Freda, that will go with her to her grave.
That's a very big theme in this movie about her. She was incredibly loyal and incredibly protective.
Yeah.
She could have, and her daughter says her mother could have made a fortune.
Yep.
She didn't keep most of the memorabilia. She had all these autographs and pieces of their hair and original albums, and she gave it all away to fans.
Most of it. She still has some.
She's got 4 boxes worth of stuff.
Right. Well, and she talks about once where she's there. There's a big move at one point where the Beatles are still living at home, which I think is the most charming thing in the world. It's like, how long you've been touring the world? How's that gonna work? Because Ringo's family home, it's like a Brooklyn apartment. It's tiny.
It's a little house.
But they come back and they're like, yeah, Brian Epstein's like, Epi is going to move us to London, and she can't go because her dad won't let her, and also her dad's in bad health, so she can't go. And she's doing a stack of autograph books, and she's like, they're going to be moving to London. I won't see them so often anymore. So she finally, after 3, 4, or 5 years, sneaks hers into the middle. And I think it was George Harrison
Yeah,
who was signing it.
He was like, well,
He's like, who's this? And she's like, no, just sign it, just sign it. And he's like, no, who's this? And he flips to the beginning and sees her name. And he's like, is this yours? And she says, yeah. And he takes it and stuffs it in his pocket. And he goes to London, gets all four of them to sign it specifically to her, where they write little messages and brings it back to her.
And she resigned. She said, no, I can't go to London, so I'm turning in my notice. And apparently no one ever had said that to Brian Epstein. Nobody quit Brian Epstein. He fired a lot of people because he was. I knew this beforehand. Brian Epstein was notorious for his violent temper and his she refers to it as tantrums.
Yeah,
but he just talks to the Beatles about it and says, no. You can stay here and work, but you're not. We need you. You can't leave.
Yeah, you can have my office.
And
my old office.
You can work in my office. I love the fact that I think it was Paul's mother who told Brian Epstein, "You're not paying her enough.
Yeah,
you should pay." And he gave her a raise because Paul's mom told him to.
Well, according to the story, he said, "We've reviewed your work and have decided to give you a rise," because they say rise in Britain.
Rise,
but
right.
but there's Paul's mom actually saying, "Yeah, it was me at a party. I'd had a couple of drinks, and basically it was like, And so you got browbeaten by Paul's mom, and even Brian Epstein couldn't deal with that.
Yeah.
Epi.
I did want to talk a little about Brian Epstein and the way he's portrayed in this, because this is I've heard other portrayals of Brian Epstein in other movies or in other writings. This is really different, because most people talked about, oh my God, he was a tyrant, and he was brilliant, but he was awful to work with, and he was just. And she's like, no, everyone respected him. He wore nice suits. He came from a nice family. Yeah, he had a temper, but she was not afraid of him at all. And one of them interviewed saying, yeah, she was the only one who was never afraid of him.
I loved the fact there was one point where, she was only 17 when she first met him, maybe
17.
17.
Yeah.
And I think it was like a couple of years. And she didn't know that Brian Epstein was gay. And one of the Beatles, I think it was George.
John. No, it was John.
It was John, who tried to tell her in the nicest way possible. He's like, well, let's put it this way. If you were the only two people left on a desert island, you'd be safe. And apparently then the little light went off, and she was like, oh.
Yeah, people speculate that's one of the reasons he was so angry all the time, because he was dealing with having to be in the closet, and he really resented it, and, can blame him.
Well, at that time, it was illegal in Britain.
Yeah, it was still literally against the law.
But also, to be fair, he's in Liverpool. Liverpool's not... it was a working-class town. It's still a working-class town.
Not very cosmopolitan.
I'm betting it wasn't. I don't know. I've never been there. But... so we're seeing, in a way, where, of course, the documentary's not about the Beatles. It's about Freda. It's about Freda Kelly and her experiences. And, of course, people... in general, let's be fair, people really aren't that interested in her. They're interested in her experiences with the Beatles. Mm. That being said, she comes off as probably the nicest person that's ever been involved with a world-class celebrity that I've ever heard of. She seemed really... every single picture of her, she's got this big smile on her face, and she still smiles like that in the film.
And the way... at least one of the other people involved, one of the musicians, described her. They said she was a fan, but she wasn't a fanatic.
Yeah.
She liked them, but she wasn't insane. And I really like the fact when you see people talking about famous bands they had some connection with, a lot of it tends to turn into an ego trip, and it tends to be very much like, oh, they used to say I was part of the band. I thought of myself as part of the band. She never says that. She just says, I was one of the fans. Yeah. I was just one of the fans. I wasn't family. I wasn't part of the band. I wasn't a fifth Beatle. No. I was the representative of the fans. And that was what was so important to her, were the fans.
Well, not only that, but it was really important to the fans, whether they realized it or not, because she went to ridiculous lengths. There's one point where a fan sends a pillowcase and says, would you please get Ringo to sleep on this and then send it back to me? And she does it.
She does it, and it would have been, as she says, it would have been so easy to just stuff it back in the envelope and said, okay, I did it, because how would you know?
Well, and
but
she
she
even
did. She
said
gives it to Ringo's mom and says, "Could you just put it on his pillow for
make
tonight?"
sure he sleeps on it. And apparently he slept on it for 3 nights, and I guess he signed it, and she sent it back. And I remember there's also one point where she has 3 helpers. They found one of them and interviewed them, and they were helping answer the fan mail, and one of the helpers got a friend to cut some hair off so she could stick it in an envelope and say this was Paul's hair, whatever. Hair. And she found out about it. Freda found out about this, and she's like, yeah, this isn't going to work. And she let all 3 of them go.
Yeah, she said, I can never trust you again. And she fired all 3 of them, even though only one was responsible.
But it's like she didn't want fake stuff to be sent out.
Nope.
And she knew what the fans, like how much they cared. The monumental task of just even looking at that mail, I can't imagine.
Yeah, she says it went from she made the mistake of using her home address for the fan mail.
Yeah.
And the postman was like, what were you thinking? You can't do this. Because at that point it was like, look, it's 800-900 letters.
Yeah.
And then it was an entire van full and baskets and baskets and baskets.
And her poor father couldn't find his own bills.
Yep.
And you just don't see this. You don't see people who have brushes with fame or are close to very famous people that don't gush about them or their time with them, or they try to self-aggrandize or anything. And she just basically, once it was over, she felt very badly. She wrote the final letter to the Beatles Fan Club newsletter, which basically said, this is it. We're done. Please don't write anymore. They've all gone off to do their separate things, and that's it. And she basically closed up the club.
But she spent 2 years answering the backlog of letters.
Yeah. Which I'm sure she wasn't even paid for.
No, I'm sure she wasn't.
And then she walked away.
Yeah.
That was it. She basically didn't tell any. She'd had a child at that point, and she actually ended up having 2 children, and obviously never told them.
Didn't talk about any of it. I mean, her son begged her to talk about it. She begged her to.
And she wouldn't.
And she wouldn't do it. She never would. And she could have made so much money. She knew all of their secrets.
Sure.
She knew who they were dating. She knew when they were getting married before anybody else knew they were getting married. And she told nobody.
And that was a really interesting point. They were actually I think it was Paul. They show footage of all of them getting married, and they get married a lot earlier than most people know. Like Ringo was the first, and he'd had a son. I'd never even heard of Zach Starkey, but there you go. But I think it was Paul got married, and they kept the news out of the papers as long as possible. And they interviewed a couple of these fans that were basically, no, he's married, I'm done, I don't want Beatles anymore, it's not the same. It's like, basically, you've ruined my fantasy that I might someday become Mrs. Paul McCartney. And apparently that was so important.
That was a big thing.
To some people that somehow, even though there's literally no way this is ever going to happen, but that means we're not going to listen to music, we're not interested, whatever. How must that screw with the band?
Seriously.
Like, that's like, we're trying to make music. Like, we're actually serious about our music. You know, the fans, the whole worldwide acclaim and everything, sure. But to find out that really the reason you're hanging on is because you hope you might marry me someday, that's weird.
They did that with a lot with the Hollywood stars, too. If they got married, they wouldn't publicize it, or they'd try to hide it because they wanted them to seem available, approachable. They wanted them to be that kind of fantasy figure.
Yeah.
I still like,
it's just nuts. I still don't understand. Like, I there's nothing in my head that understands the traction to that level of fame. There's famous people I like to meet because I'd like artists and stuff. I'd like to talk to them about how they do what they do. But like, if I got into an elevator with Bono, I might say hello.
Hey, Sonny.
He's dead.
Oh, right.
I wouldn't say hello. I'd be more like,
the dead live.
Yeah. But and I've met a few famous people here and there. I've met Tommy Lee Jones, a gentleman you call sir. I don't know why. You just do. Trust me.
Just do. Yep.
Other people in the comic book industry. But it's like, I can't fathom. Like, I just have no chemistry in my head that can come together and make me understand that.
Yeah, I don't understand wanting to marry someone based on an album cover.
Yeah, or like I like their music. It's like cool. I like their music. I might love to sit there and talk to them about their music, but I don't want to marry.
This wasn't unique to the Beatles even at that time. I mean, you had the Elvis fans, but when they show, like, as she said, when Freda talks about when she first realized how big they had become, when they came back from one of the, I think, the European tour.
Yeah.
And they're being honored at the City Hall.
Yeah.
And 200,000 people showed up. And she was saying, I never even could visualize 200,000 people. That was when I knew how huge they were. And I love the line, the guy interviews her, says, "What was Beatlemania to you?" And without a pause, she says, "No sleep." And she was up like all day and night answering the mountains of fan mail.
Well, I love the part too, and I don't think it was necessarily at that big 200,000 people thing, but there was a big crowd at one point, and she's trying to get through because she literally has their pay packets.
Yep,
and she's trying to tell the cops, no, I have to get through. I work for them. I have their money, and they're like, yeah, you and 1,000 other people. She just sort of was, okay, I get it, and she walked off, but...
I like that most of their money, they would go directly into the bank, but they'd all get like 50 pounds walking around money a week. And she would have it in envelopes, and she would bring it to them. Or like when she needed them to sign stuff, she would just show up at their houses in the evening while they're watching TV. And while they're watching TV, they're sitting there with this mountain of stuff, and they're all signing. And I like that she tried to get them to sign, actually, with a pen, even though for a while they had... a stamp.
Yeah.
But she kept ruining people's autograph books with it. And she's always thinking in terms not of the band, but it's like, what if this was me? If this was my autograph book, I'd be heartbroken if someone did that.
Yeah.
And John was the one who really didn't approve, and seems like he got it stopped.
Yeah. I also like the fact that, again, she was not a big person. She was a little... waify
slip of a girl.
Young woman. And apparently, though, if you came into the office, she would put you to work. It didn't matter who you were. You could be part of another band or whatever, but her thought was, oh, well, you could carry a mail sack. Oh, well, you could sort these letters. Or like you just said, oh, Ringo, while you're watching telly, you could be signing these things.
And one of the things one of the other musicians says, it just about how she was, I wouldn't want to be in Freda's bad books. You didn't want her mad at you.
Yeah. She just got things done. And that somehow they picked the right person because of her willingness to keep quiet, but also her work ethic. And she's still working, at least at the time of this, making this film, which pissed off her daughter. Her daughter's like, she could have been rich and retired, and she's still a secretary. Yeah. And if you watch the images of Freda in her office, she looks perfectly content.
Yep.
She's like, this is what I do. My mom was like that. My mom was 78 when she passed away, and she missed her goal by about a week, which was literally to kick over at her desk. It was the only reason she didn't was because she had to go from her desk to the hospital. Otherwise, that's what she liked to do. And you can tell Freda Kelly's the same way. She's like, yeah, that's nice, but I got stuff to do. And if she'd been just sitting there doing nothing, she probably would have wasted away.
Yeah. No, that's clearly she needs something to do. And I like there's one of the stories she tells is they're on a show and the Moody Blues are performing also. And she goes and hangs out with them for a while.
Well, you remember why? Because she couldn't get into the dressing room with the Beatles.
Right, yep. And she goes over there, has a few drinks, finally makes her way back to the Beatles. And John's like, where have you been? Like, I was hanging out with the Moody Blues. And he gets furious. And he fires her. He said, well, go be their fan club secretary. And she just looks at him and looks at the other three and says, are you three firing me? And they all very quietly say, no. And she says, fine, I'll work for you three. I won't answer your fan mail anymore, John. And he says, no, I didn't mean it. I'm kidding. I want you back. And she's a little drunk. And she says... get down on both knees and ask me. He says, can I get down on one knee? And he's like, all right. And apparently he did. I love that. That's like, you don't mess with Freda.
I also, just there's one other story she does. She talks about how she wrote all the letters. There was a newsletter in every episode of the Beatles magazine or whatever you want to call it. And there's one where she actually had to address one of the weirdest fan theories. She actually had to start one off with, Paul's not dead.
Oh, yeah.
Although we all know Paul's been slain in a bloody car crash.
Oh, I'm dead. I also like, there's like a reporter snapped a picture of Paul walking her home. And the rumor went around, in fact, it was published in the paper, that they were married.
Yeah. And they had to print a retraction saying, no, they're not. And they showed it. There was the little newspaper clipping.
Yeah.
It was, and to this day, you see, like, they're showing the tooth again, 2013, so it's 9 years ago. But we're seeing this footage of her in her little house, and she looks perfectly content. And we get some footage of her daughter, who's just like, she didn't, Beatles, her, them, together, nothing.
Yeah,
I did nothing.
I think there's a little family tension about that. But.
Well, and she felt badly because her son died young, although he'd had a son, and they show her with the grandson. And she's like, again, what Max said in his view of the opening of the film, I just kind of want to make sure that he knows what his Grammy did and stuff. And of course, I'm sitting there looking at this little 2-3-year-old boy going, he's not even going to know who the Beatles are.
I bet he will. I bet he will, especially if they still live in Liverpool.
Now, there are statues.
Oh, yeah. But I did want to talk about the way the film itself is done. A lot of it, well, there's some archival footage. A lot of it is just her being interviewed in her house.
Yeah.
And we see her clambering up into her basement with one of those drop-down ladders.
Up into her attic.
Up into her attic, excuse me. You're right. Up into the attic and digging around. Oh, I think these are the Christmas tree lights. And finding these 4 remaining boxes of Beatles memorabilia.
Yeah.
And like club tickets and theater tickets and letters from fans. It's very grounded. This is very small scale.
Yeah.
The only thing we see of the tour at one point is she talks about being on the Magical Mystery Tour.
Yep.
And how to book them into hotels, they couldn't say it's the Beatles because they wouldn't let them. So she would book them in as like the Women's Catholic League.
Well, they had long hair. So.
Yeah.
And the thing that killed me is when she's pulling down the ladder and she's an older woman at this point. I'm guessing she's at least in her 60s.
She was 68 when the movie was made, yeah.
There you go. All I could think of was, would somebody please get out from behind the camera and help the poor woman?
Yeah, she's lugging these big cartons around. Come on, man.
Yeah. And the film did have how to put this nicely, a rather handmade feeling about it. And then at the end, it's like, oh, Kickstarter. Okay, that explains a lot.
Yeah.
And as I already sort of let go, spoiler, there is one bit during the credits where Ringo, I don't know how they got Ringo. Honestly, everything I've seen about Ringo just seems to say that he's just a really nice guy.
I wanted to know where Paul was. Why didn't they get him?
I agree. But Ringo's there, and it looks like they got him in a parking lot or something. It doesn't look like particularly... But he's like, oh, yes, I remember Freda, good old Freda. She did so much for us. I'm glad she's doing well. Peace, love, Ringo. And he's just... And that's every time I see Ringo, and every time I hear about Ringo, of all the 4 of them, he seems like he was the one who was the most grounded and the most who stayed with the whole hippie, peace, love, everybody's cool thing, and doesn't like to get into trouble and doesn't cause problems. He's just... Ringo. One
of the things that I like that she talks about is when the 4 of them were sort of starting to drift apart. John was going off with Yoko into the peace movement, and George was getting into this mysticism, and Paul wanted to do his own project, and Ringo wanted to focus on his family.
Yeah, and because he had one son, and I think he had another kid on the way. He ended up with 2 sons, of whom I know nothing.
Yep.
Which probably good for them.
Good job, guys.
And I think one of them's literally my age. I think he was born in 65. So, oops, I gave that away. Everyone thought I was only 22. I'm pretty much through my notes, Max. What about you?
I got a couple of things. There were just a couple of the lines she says, which I really liked toward the end when she's talking about... how she could have made more money selling things. And I just like the line, all the wealth doesn't cure cancer, does it?
Yeah.
And like her sign off, the last thing is, I never have to tell this tale again. It's down on record. I'm done.
Yep.
I just, like, this is not something she wanted to do, or it's something she felt she needed to do, and she's glad that it's done, but this is not going to be the rest of her life, which it wasn't. And I just thought that was very cool. But yeah, I think I'm about done. Shall we get to the wrap up?
I think we should get to the wrap up.
The roundup.
So, Max.
Yes.
We saw this together, apparently.
We did. Yes, we did.
Do you remember?
And my
No, you
God,
don't.
you were such a pain in the ass in that theater. You almost got us thrown out 4 times, kept starting fights, throwing matches at the screen.
Explosive flatulence. What do you think of this film?
I really like it. I've seen a bunch of Beatles documentaries, and while this isn't by no means the most comprehensive, it's the most human. It's so grounded. Seeing it from the perspective of this utterly unpretentious, unimpressed with either herself or the whole phenomenon, just solid person. This very real person about, yeah, this was my job. I loved them, but it's done. And it didn't destroy her life or didn't become the focus of who she was. I think it gives some insights into these people I didn't have before I saw this. Mm-hmm. What about you?
I have 2 feelings on this film. One of which is that I just really like her. How could you not like her? Because she's so unfazed and she's so nice, but she's so steadfast in her beliefs. It's like, no, I'm loyal to them, and none of that stuff's anybody's business. And I'm not going to tell anybody. Does she have things to tell? Maybe she does, maybe she doesn't. It doesn't matter. The point is, you're not going to hear it from her. She's not going to confirm or deny. The only thing she confirmed was that Paul wasn't dead.
Yeah. And they weren't married.
And they weren't married. It's a very charming look, and it's interesting because after watching this film, I still don't know everything, but I don't really have any questions either. Like, somehow the director and Freda herself, for me anyway, made me feel okay with the fact that she's not talking. Like, nope, that's what it's all is. And the film's really about her, but it's also really about her connection to the Beatles. Because we don't find out about, like in 1973, oh, what were you doing then? We know she was married, but we don't find that much about her. It's really about when she was the secretary to the Beatles fan club, and then now that she's willing to talk about it, and her whole family's like, you were what?
Yeah.
And I'm sure before this film came out, most people, unless they had been Beatles fans and written into the club, never heard her name, never anything about her.
She did we saw that she was mentioned in a bunch of press clippings. I mean, the girl with the job every other girl envies.
Yeah, but in present day,
nowadays, nobody knows.
Nobody would know who she was.
Yep.
And so I think it's a very charming documentary. It's not too long. It doesn't take itself too seriously. I think, though, that the audience is more limited. And I say this because I watched it. My partner happened to be on the couch at the same time, even though I told him I'd put headphones on. And when the credits started rolling, his instant reaction was, well, that was boring.
Oh.
And it's fine. He has no interest in the Beatles. It's fine.
That's a big thing. For people who are not Beatles fans, I don't think this would be interesting at all.
No, because basically it's a documentary about a really nice person.
Yeah. And
not really that interesting.
Yep, nope.
Except, you sit there and have to go, I bet there's just not that many people like that have that sense of honor, that ability to just not be impressed past a certain point.
And don't feel the need to tell all the secrets and, here's the drugs they were taking and here's all the women they were with.
And quite honestly, to have the love without having the...
Yeah, the very real, very human love. Because she knew who they were.
Yeah.
She knew them as people before they were, religious figures.
Yeah.
Until they were bigger than Jesus.
Yeah. And I get why people were pissed at that, but he actually had a good point. And
yes, he
thought
did.
The whole thing was ridiculous. That was his reason for saying it. Wasn't saying we're better. He was saying we're bigger than this religion. And that blows my mind. I don't understand it. That's what he meant. But of course, we're going to burn records now because you said Jeebus. Whatever.
Yeah.
But hey, that was good old Freda. But we should talk about that poll question again.
Yes, we should.
People don't know how to get in touch with us.
Yes, but just again, What action movie cliche punches the biggest hole in your suspension of disbelief? People walking away from explosions, diving unharmed through a plate glass window, always finding a parking space right in front of the burning building, whatever. And to answer that, you can, of course, email us at maxmikemovies.com and concurrently go over to our website, which is maxmikemovies.com. What a twist!
Shamalaman.
Yep. Shamalian. You can leave a comment there. You can also, of course, we're available on the media socially networkable, like the Facebook and the tweets, under Max Mike Movies.
Weird.
And of course on the podcast app of our choice, not yours, because we control the horizontal, the vertical, and your podcast app. We just do.
We barely control our own podcast.
We barely control our own bodily functions. But yes, we've had a documentary about the Beatles. What are we watching next week, Mike? Also about the Beatles.
Yesterday.
But you didn't tell me.
Yeah, totally did.
I didn't
just
talk to you
told
yesterday.
you. Yesterday.
When?
Yesterday.
What time?
Yesterday.
Third base.
We're going to watch Yesterday, which is one of those Beatles adjacent films. I have not seen it. Inspired by. Basically, it's about a guy who wakes up and finds out that, strangely, he's the only one who remembers the Beatles and decides, well, there's a golden opportunity. I think I'll be the Beatles. And we'll see if this is a reaction to the Beatles, about the Beatles fandom, or if it's at all enjoyable or stuff like that there.
Sort of googly moogly, higgly wiggly.
If you want to join us, don't forget, join us yesterday.
This has been a co-production of The Voice of Max and The Movie Wrench.